ॐ तव कथमृतं तप्तजीवनं कविभिरीडितं कल्मषापहं शरणमङ्गलं श्रीमदाततं भुवि गृह्णन्ति हृदिराज. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're on the chapter with the devotees at Dakshineswar, Part 2. This is page 334, Friday, December 14th, 1883. This chapter is with the devotees of Dakshineswar, but really, the most important aspect of this chapter is that M has his longest stay at one stretch with Sri Ramakrishna. This is when he spent, I don't know how long, 2-3 weeks, something like that, a long period, and a very important and troubling period in his life because he was struggling with so many things, struggling with whether to live at home. He wasn't happy with his living in his father's house. He had moved out. This is a constant struggle back and forth. Thakur telling him to go back home, and he couldn't live with them. He was the only one really with any spiritual interest, except for his younger brother, Kishori, who used to come with him sometime. And the struggle between householder life and monastic life. He was a very uncomfortable fit with the householder life and always had this longing to lead the pure monastic life. So all of these things are kind of, he's struggling with these in his mind. We get a sense of it throughout all of this chapter, this period. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Sri Ramakrishna was standing on the southeast veranda near the door of his room, with Ramlal by his side. Rakal and Latu were moving about. This Rakal and Latu was staying with Thakur more or less all of the time, and Rakal, different periods he would stay there. So this is the one time when apparently they're both living with Sri Ramakrishna. Rakal and Latu were moving about. M arrived and prostrated himself before the master. Sri Ramakrishna said to him affectionately, "You have come. That's very good. Today is an auspicious day." The day before he went, then he went home, then he came back again, and now he'll stay on, if I remember correctly. It was the last day of the Bengali month and the day of the full moon. M was going to spend a few days with the master practicing spiritual discipline, more than a few days. It's a long stretch. This is the Christmas vacation. The master had said to him, "If an aspirant practices a little spiritual discipline, then someone comes forward to help him." Thakur's way of saying that he'll be there to help him without mentioning his name, of course. The master said to him, "You should not eat every day at the guest house of the Kali temple. The guest house is intended to supply free food to monks and the destitute. Bring your own cook with you." There were two different feeding places, one connected with the Kali temple and one with the Krishna temple. One was, of course, the Vaishnava vegetarian side, and then the other was non-vegetarian. Many people were fed. Rani Rashmani, she set up the Dakshineswar temple garden so that many sadhus came, many poor people came. Sadhus loved to go there. They had a nice place to stay and food and everything. It was very, very comfortable for them. But food wasn't meant for someone like M, who had his own income and everything. M had accordingly done so. He brought a cook with him. The master arranged a place for the men to cook, and he asked Ramlal to speak to the milkman about milk. A little later, Ramlal began to read from the Adhyatma Ramayana. The master and M listened while he read. This was one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorite texts, and he refers to it a lot, but he doesn't recommend it for the householders. Kumar and I are reading it now. I never read it before, but we're slowly going through it. It's mostly the Ramayana story, nothing very much different, but from time to time, this Rama himself will give some beautiful philosophical portions and about renunciation and things. And probably there are portions that are highly Advaitic also that we haven't read yet. I'm not that familiar with the text, but Thakur, for some reason, didn't like the householders, to study it too much, and yet he'll have Ramlal reading it in front of all of them. And M, who would follow anything that Sri Ramakrishna said, anything he said for him, it was like the gospel that he couldn't. Still, he read a little of this. He seemed to be very familiar with it. Adhyatma Ramayana. We see in the chapter in Varanagur Mutt that talking to Virendra and Rakal that he was familiar with it. So a little later, Ramlal began to read from the Adhyatma Ramayana. The master and M listened while he read. Rama had married Sita after breaking the great bow of Shiva. On the way to Ayodhya with his bride, Rama was confronted by the warrior sage Parashurama, who was about to make trouble for him. Parashurama threw a bow at Rama and challenged him to string it. Dasharatha, Rama's father, was seized with fear. With a smile, Rama took the bow in his left hand and strung it. Then, twanging the bowstring, he fixed an arrow and asked Parashurama where to shoot it. That curbed the pride of the warrior sage. Prostrating himself before Rama, Parashurama worshipped him as the supreme Brahman. As Sri Ramakrishna listened to Parashurama's hymn, he went into a spiritual mood and now and then chanted the name of Rama in his melodious voice. Then the master asked Ramlal to read about Guhaka. Ramlal read. Guhaka, the pariah, was chief of the untouchables and an intimate friend of Rama. When Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana were starting into the forest to redeem Dasharatha's pledge, Guhaka ferried them across the river. Rama embraced Guhaka tenderly and told him he was going to spend 14 years in exile, wearing the bark of trees and eating the herbs, fruits, and roots that grew in the woods. The bark of trees. This means just the dress that the ancient sages, this is Munivesha, we read about that. It's hard for us to imagine what it means, bark of trees, but they had some way of making some dress out of it. So it just meant living the simplest type of life. He promised to visit Guhaka again on his way back to Ayodhya after the period of exile was over. The pariah king waited patiently, but when the 14th year had run out and Rama had not returned, Guhaka lighted a funeral pyre. He was on the point of entering it when Hanuman arrived as Rama's messenger. In a celestial chariot, Rama and Sita soon appeared, and Guhaka's joy was unbounded. After the midday meal, Sri Ramakrishna lay down on his bed to rest and was seated on the floor. Presently, Dr. Shama and a few devotees arrived. The master sat up on the bed and began to converse with them. Master, it is by no means necessary for a man always to be engaged in his duties. For a man, it means for a woman also. We have to remember when this was translated, this is in the 30s, that this language, gender and language was a completely different thing at that time. Anyhow, actions drop away when one realizes God, as the flower drops of itself when the fruit appears. Now, Thakur used to give slightly different teachings about these things. We're reading Swami Pudashanandaji's lecture, he makes a big point. Oh no, I'm reading this other thing about Thakur's different teachings on different subjects based on who he's talking to, this adhikara bheda. And this is one thing that when do actions drop off? Now, here he's saying that when one realizes God, other times he'll say, as we progress in spiritual life, slowly they drop off. And he gives the illustration of the daughter-in-law who's pregnant, and the mother-in-law will reduce her duties little by little by little by little. And the main point is that we don't make that decision ourselves, that it seems to be automatic. It's either grace or just our karma gets exhausted or whatever it is. But as we get closer and closer to God realization, through some magic, some either the Thakur's grace or this karma or something, we have more and more time to do our spiritual practice till we have that God realization. Now, he says actions drop away when one realizes God. Now, other times he'll say that after the realization of God, one will go back and live in the world. This is also possible. So it depends. He gives the example of the clerk who's sent to jail. And then when he's released, he says, what does he do? Does he go about singing and dancing in the street? He goes back to being a clerk. So depending on the nature of the individual and the type of karma and whether householder or monk, that they may go back and do what they did before. And this is one of the great themes of Gita. Even Sri Krishna himself, he says, I don't have to do anything. There's nothing that I gain by doing anything, nothing that I lose by not doing something, but still I remain engaged in action. So for the welfare of others, or to set an example. So this is, for some reason here, he's talking about these actions drop away when one realizes God. That means that one doesn't act out of a sense of duty afterwards. It's free, completely free. This is something we see in the life of Swamiji, how he was so devoted to, of course, for him, duty meant mission. It meant Thakur's mission. So devoted to it and so longing to be free from it. This scorching midday sun of duty, he would talk about, and how happy he was when he went back to India, turned everything over to Swami Brahmananda. And said, now everything is yours. And he made him the president and everything. He really wanted to be free from all of that. So everyone is a little different. Sri Ramakrishna, how to the very last moment, last breath that he took, he was helping people through giving teachings, even when he could barely talk. So there's so many different ways of this manifesting itself, that after realization or getting closer to realization, what we do, what type of duties we perform, the householder may continue, but there'll be some period when mind gets completely absorbed in God. Otherwise, realization is not too easy, in order to really have that. Okay, come on. Okay. Well, Mataji is here. She wanted to add something. Come on. Ram Prasad, you were saying. Okay. Yeah, Ram Prasad is a very good example of Mother's grace. Here, his life story was very, in many ways, very similar to Sri Ramakrishna, that he had to go into Calcutta for work. He lived in not a village, he lived in a town, Shihor, not far from Kolkata, but he had to go there for work, and he was a clerk, and he had to keep accounts, and he wasn't at all suited for that. And instead of really keeping the accounts, he would scribble and write the name of Durga, Kali, and everything, and then he started composing songs. And he was the only one in the office who didn't take bribes, so nobody else liked him there. So they went to the boss and said, "This Ram Prasad, you love him so much. What is he doing? He's not keeping the accounts. He's writing the songs and everything." And his boss, see, this is Thakur's grace, or mother's grace. The boss started reading these songs, and tears came into his eyes. And the first song, you remember the first song? There's something about keeping Shiva not able to keep the accounts of mother, something like that. Something about his situation. So his boss said, Ram Prasad, you weren't cut out for this type of life. You go back to your home, you compose your songs, you do all of that. I'll give you the same salary that you had before. So he went back, and then the second thing happened. He used to go. The bathing ghat is not far. I went there to Shihor. It's a very nice place. Have you been? Yeah. You can walk from his home to the Ganga there. So he used to go there, and while bathing, he would sing the songs. And one day in the boat, there was some Maharaja of that area, I don't know who it was, went by and heard him singing, and also was charmed. So gave him a little plot of land and some money. Anyhow, he didn't have to work his whole life. He could devote his whole life to his spiritual practice. So there's a good example. So we can say how grace, or karma, however we understand it, but somehow the example of the mother-in-law, it's not the daughter-in-law who decides. The mother-in-law takes care of everything. That means the Divine Mother. But this other thing, actions drop away when one realizes God. As the flower drops of itself when the fruit appears. That means it's natural. It's not a forced type of thing. Thakur gives so many examples of how this happens naturally. And if we force it, then it won't be helpful for us. He gives the example of we scrape our hand and we get a little sore and a scab forms. And if we pull the scab off before it's healed underneath, it'll bleed again, and then another scab will form. If we wait, when it's perfectly healed, the scab will come off on its own. So for Sri Ramakrishna, if he heard that somebody decided to just renounce everything and knew that they weren't ready for it, he would scold them and say, no, you have your duties and obligations at home. You have to fulfill that. But if it's genuine, then he would, of course, always support it. He who has realized God no longer performs religious duties such as the sandhya. Now, this is a little bit different. Now he's talking about some formal type of worship. He's not talking about after God realization, one has to renounce the world and leave home and do all of that. Someone can still, if they're a teacher or they're whatever the profession is, they could do it. But they're released from having to do this formal type of worship and everything, just as a sannyasi is. Sannyasi doesn't have to realize God, but just becoming a sannyasi, and then there's no need to do, in fact, not permitted to do a lot of Vedic type of formal worship and things. And Thakur, see, he says he was realized God, but other times he'll say those who have developed love of God. The realization of God is a very rare thing. If we only take it that way, it'll apply to very, very few people. But he also talks about those who develop great love for God, bhakti, real bhakti. They also don't have to do these formal types of things. He who has realized God no longer performs religious duties such as the sandhya. In his case, the sandhya emerges in the Gayatri. When that happens, it is enough for a person to repeat just the Gayatri mantra. Then the Gayatri merges in Om. After that, one no longer chants even the Gayatri. It is enough then to simply chant Om. These are all formal types of worship that in the Indian tradition, when the Brahmin boy takes the sacred thread, he gets initiated with his Gayatri mantra. When we take our brahmacharya vows, we also get that with the sacred thread along with that. And it's something that I know many cases, young monks will join the order. And when they join, they'll ask, They'll take initiation. They say, does this mean we don't do Gayatri? If they were invested with the sacred thread, do we not do our Gayatri mantra anymore? And generally, they're told to continue. There's almost always, and it's considered very, very sacred. We know that, and it was very restricted in the old days. We don't bother about that, of course, in our tradition at all. But this was such a sacred Vedic mantra that it was given just to the Brahmins and boys. This Dvija, twice born, at some time it may have been the three upper classes, castes. Otherwise, we think generally Brahmins, different traditions in different places. But the point is that it's not necessary to do all of the formal worship in the beginning, but not to give up everything. So the sandhya, it means that you have to do certain types of rituals along with it, with the chanting of the Gayatri. And at some point, that can be given up in just the chanting of Gayatri. And when the mind is so merged in God, fixed in God, then one doesn't even have to do that, then simply Om. So this is Thakur's way of saying that it's a gradual progression, that formalities drop off, the more that there's a real love of God grows. And sometimes, of course, he talks about two completely different stages. There's Vaidhi Bhakti and Anuraga. That when this real love of God comes, then automatically everything else falls away. That also, he gives some beautiful examples that in the dry season, we have to follow the course of the river, of all the ins and outs and everything, and follow everything according to the way it's laid out there. And the rainy season, then we go straight. We don't bother everything. It's flooded. So when everything is, the Gita also has that beautiful verse. What use the Vedas and all other rituals and formal things when there's a flood everywhere? That means that flood of love of God, devotion. How long should a person practice such devotions as the sandhya? As long as he does not feel a thrill in his body and shed tears of joy while repeating the name of Rama or Hari. So look, first he said God realization. Now he's saying just this. So he's not contradicting himself. He's just in two different scenarios or two different ways of looking at it. But we actually, for those following this path of devotion, they care more for this tears of joy than they do for mukti, that type of liberation. They care more for getting real devotion, real bhakti. So as long as he does not feel a thrill in his body and shed tears of joy while repeating the name of Rama or of Hari, people worship God to win money or a lawsuit. That is not good, a devotee. We find that everyone strives after money. Even Keshav Sen married his daughter to a prince. Okay, now this is also a complicated thing. It's not, and Thakur always, it seems that he always defends Keshav. He loved Keshav so much, and very often he would say his father's duty to look after the daughter. The reference is to Keshav giving his daughter in marriage to the son of the Maharaja of Kuch Bihar. And one of the very strong principles of the Brahmo Samaj, Adi Brahmo Samaj, I think this was something passed by Devendranath Tagore, was this marriageable age of girls. And Keshav arranged this marriage when his daughter was just below that age. And it wasn't such a horrible thing, but it looked very hypocritical. And because of that, there was a big split. Vijay Krishna Goswami was a highly principled person. He thought that this was not right, even though they were very close. So there was a split, and Keshav ended up with his Navavidhan and the other Brahmo Samaj. And it's interesting because Keshav didn't live long after this, and Vijay didn't stay in the world long after this because he renounced everything and became a monk. So But this is that reference. Keshav said he didn't really marry his daughter for the money of it. It was arranged a very good marriage. He was looking after her welfare. So anyhow, Master said, Keshav's case is quite different. God provides everything for a genuine devotee, even without his making any effort. The son of a real king gets his monthly allowance. I am not talking of lawyers and men of that sort who go through suffering in order to earn money and who become slaves of others to that end. I'm speaking of a real prince. A true devotee has no desire. He does not care for money. Money comes to him of itself. So it sounds like he's saying in Keshav's case that it wasn't greed or anything. And Keshav probably knew that he wouldn't live long at that time when he arranged the marriage because he's suffering so badly at this time. And Thakur knows even when Thakur first met M, one of the first things he asked him when he finds out there's a connection with there's Ishan who's related, and he says, "Oh, how was Keshav?" Because he knew he was ill at that time. So it's quite likely that the Keshav felt some urgency to arrange this marriage. Of course, I'm guessing at all of this because of his own health. And Thakur never blamed him for it. The Gita describes such a devotee as content with what comes to him without effort. We have a few different places where this idea is there, and it's really meant for, if we do it literally, it's meant for the sadhus. If we take it a little bit figuratively, it's meant for everyone, a real devotee. That means that for a sadhu, they won't make any effort even for anything, whatever comes of its own. This is practice that some will do. Swamiji did this on different occasions, where he said, "Today I won't even beg for my food. We'll see if Thakur brings something for me or not." And almost always something would come that way. So there's some sadhus that won't even do that. Whatever comes of its own without effort even. Shushka Parnavat. They'll just be like that dried leaf on the tree. They won't make any effort. Wherever the wind blows them, they'll go. For the householder, it simply means that whatever comes after performance of duty, unselfish duty, then one is content with that. Not always seeking more money and more wealth and enjoyments and everything. This idea of contentment, content with what comes without effort or without much effort. There's a very nice verse, I don't know where it's from. Yena kenichit achanno, yena kenichit asidaha, yatra kochana shayisyat, tam deva brahmanam viduhu. There's a definition of who is a Brahmin. You know that verse? Yeah. That he who will wear any clothes, eat any food, that means whatever comes to him, who can lie down anywhere. Him the gods call a Brahmin, and not someone who's just born in a Brahmin family. There's a definition of a Brahmin from a spiritual point of view, who's worthy to be. There are a lot of verses in Puranas and other things that talk about this Nama Brahman, those who are Brahmin in name only. And this is who is in Brahmin. I mean, who is really living in Brahmin? The person who doesn't care about where they sleep, what food they get, what clothes they have, anything like that. Content with whatever comes, taking it as mother's will, or just taking it as this is my karma. This is what is due to me from whatever I did in the past. So I won't question it. I'll be content. So Gita describes such a devotee as content with what comes to him without effort. A good Brahmin, without any personal motive, can accept food even from the house of an untouchable. See, Thakur coming from Orthodox Brahmin village and family. His father was extremely Orthodox that way. For him to say this is amazing how liberal thinker that he was. He does not desire it, it comes of its own accord. A devotee, sir, how should one live in the world? Now, you remember when M asked a series of questions in the very beginning. This was one of the important questions that he asked. Master, and Thakur will give the same answer. This was one of the answers he gave. Live in the world as the mudfish lives in the mud. One develops love of God by going away from the world into solitude now and then, and meditating on God. Okay, so he's not giving a follow-up with that first part. We'll get it later. But the first part is live in the world without being attached to anything so that no stain comes. And the second thing is go into solitude from time to time. The third thing, of course, will be holy company. He doesn't talk about it here, I think, but when M asks the question, he'll mention those three things specially. One, keep holy company. Two, go into solitude from time to time. And three, lead a life of detachment. Live in the world like the maidservant in the rich man's home, or like the mudfish. He said, one can live in the world unattached. The mud is there, and the fish has to live in it, but its body is not stained by the mud. Such a person can lead the life of a householder in a spirit of detachment. The master noticed that M was listening to his words with great attention. Now, this is what I was saying, that M was really, he was a very serious person to begin with. He didn't laugh and joke around that much. Thakur noticed that at the very beginning, that these young boys were laughing at everything. And he said, oh, you see him sitting there, he's a little bit older than the others. He was 28 or something, and the others were 18 or 20, something like that. So, but here, he's really listening very carefully because in his mind, he has this dilemma. He really, we don't see it so specifically mentioned here because these will be private conversations with Sri Ramakrishna. But he really, he would have been very happy if Thakur would have allowed him to become a sannyasi. We feel that Thakur left him in the world to give this special ideal, Grihi sannyasi, that someone, while in the Garhastya ashram, in the householder stage of life, has the mindset of a sannyasa. And he really had that. And we know that there were different times when he would even sleep among the homeless to feel that he had no home. He would go, there was in front of, where is it, the Metropolitan College?
Senate Hall.
Huh?
Senate Hall.
Senate Hall, was it? Anyhow, the big open area, and a lot of homeless people would just put their blankets down and sleep there. So he would do it sometime, just to feel that he also was fully relying on God, had nothing, no home of his own, nothing to call his own. University, Metropolitan University or something? Calcutta University. Oh. So we know, and his family life wasn't very happy. At some point, I don't know if it already happened or it happens after this, the child dies, the son dies, wife goes nearly mad, everything. So there's great turmoil in his mind. So Thakur was noticing it, that not just listening to his words with great attention, but really, should he lead a householder life? Should he renounce everything? Because in those days, it wasn't that unusual that even a married person had this tremendous renunciation feeling of vairagya, that they would leave the world. They would renounce the world. In fact, there's one time, did we read it yet? It comes later, I think, when Thakur's looking for him and he can't find him. And then later he says, oh, I thought for a minute that you jumped the wall and ran off, that you'll renounce everything. Then I thought, no, he doesn't do anything without thinking about it carefully first. So Thakur noticed that M was listening, so he addresses him. Master, looking at M. One can realize God if one feels intense dispassion for worldly things. A man with such dispassion feels that the world is like a forest on fire. Thakur is being a troublemaker now. He's just going to create, and I'm joking, of course, but he's going to create a little more turmoil in M's mind, I think. He regards his wife and children as a deep well. So now M is thinking, what am I going to do? There is another incident. We remember when in the beginning when M says to Sri Ramakrishna, "What should one do if one's wife is becoming an obstacle in one's spiritual life?" Then he says, "You give up such a wife, and if she threatens to commit suicide, such an ungodly wife, yeah." So then again, M is deeply thinking, "Oh my God, what to do?" And then Thakur goes back and says, "But if one leads a very sincere spiritual life, then everyone around, all family members and everything, they'll also come around that way." So then he was greatly relieved. So he'll also get relieved a little bit after a while, but he regards his wife and children as a deep well. If he really feels that kind of dispassion, he renounces home and family. It is not enough for him to live in the world in a spirit of detachment. So this is really... And
Swamiji's grandfather had to lock him in the room.
Swamiji's grandfather. This is a good example that after the birth of one son, this is why Swamiji had no uncles on his father's side. His father was the first son that was born, and after he was born, then his grandfather renounced the world. That was also part of the tradition that if one married, at least leave a son to look after the wife. At least do that much. And so he renounced the world. Nobody saw him anymore. His name was Durga. Huh? What was his full name? Durga Charan? Or no? Huh? Durga Charan. And there were two special instances. One, Swamiji's grandmother was in the Benares, and she happened to slip. And one sadhu was there, and they helped her up. And she looked and saw it was her husband. One Ganga. And he quickly ran away. He recognized her and quickly went away. Then they caught him another time and brought him home, forced him somehow, and more or less locked him in the room. And they saw that he would just sit and meditate. He didn't take any food. They thought, "The poor man, he'll just die. What point is it?" So they left the door open one day, and he just escaped. So when Swamiji was born, Narendra, they all said he resembled his grandfather, and they wanted to name him after the grandfather. And then Swamiji's mother, she said no. He was born through the grace of Shiva. He should be named Vireshwar for Shiva. And then later they called him Narendra, of course. But that was a genuine case. He was very genuine, had that real renunciation. So Swamiji had that in his bones through his family line also. Lust and gold alone is Maya. If Maya is once recognized, it feels ashamed of itself and takes to flight. This there's some nice Sanskrit verses. I don't remember them about this. That looking at Maya, that Maya, lojja, out of embarrassment, will run away. This Maya. There are other stories about this. One I like very much is something Ramana Maharshi would say about the ego. This is mostly when we say Maya, we say we look for this ego. We try to find this ego, and we won't find it if we search for it. Thakur, this is his onion example, really. That you want to find this ego, you look, and the body, mind, senses, everything. You peel away, and there's nothing. You find there's no ego left there. But this Ramana Maharshi, he says his ego is like an uninvited guest at a wedding crasher. That both sides of the family see somebody walk in, and he's very loud and obnoxious, and he's drinking too much and eating too much and stuffing things in his pocket and doing everything like that. And each thinks that he was invited by the other side of the family. And then they look at each other and say, they say, no. Did you invite him? No. And as soon as he knows that he's been caught, he runs away. So as soon as this ego is recognized as the real rascal that it is, and the troublemaker and everything, then it disappears. But Thakur says it comes back. This is the problem. So what to do about it? But out of embarrassment, yes, now I've been caught, I have to run away. So this is a great teaching of Thakur, that we recognize that this ego is a flimsy thing. It's an unsubstantial thing. That there's no substance behind it. But we can't get rid of that idea of ego. It'll come back. So utilize it. Form a relationship with God. One of the really wonderful teachings. If Maya is once recognized, it feels ashamed of itself and takes to flight. A man put on a tiger skin. A man put on a tiger skin and tried to frighten another man. But the latter said, "Ah, I have recognized you. You are our Hari." At that, the man dressed in the skin went away smiling to frighten someone else. Now, we can take this Maya also just as ignorance in general. And once we know the real nature of the self, or once we know the divine nature of this world or something, then we won't get that attachment again. All women are the embodiments of Shakti. It is the primal power that has become women and appears to us in the form of women. It is said in the Adhyatma Ramayana, again, Adhyatma Ramayana, that Narada and others praised Rama, saying, "O Rama, thou alone art all that we see as male, and Sita, all that we see as female. Thou art Indra, and Sita is Indrani. Thou art Shiva, and Sita is Shivani. Thou art man, and Sita is woman. What more need I say? Thou alone dost exist wherever there is a male, and Sita wherever there is a female." Now, why all of this distinction, male and female? We know that the Sankhya philosophy, Shakti philosophy, all of these see creation as a combination of the active and passive principles, or that nature and the absolute infinite, nirguna Brahman, saguna Brahman, however we understand it. That there's always this two sides of the same coin, and there's this saguna aspect is always connected with the female side, because is the woman who gives birth to the child. Child comes out of the woman. So when we talk about this universe issuing forth out of this divine womb, it'll be looked upon as female. Otherwise, no distinction. Swamiji is very clear in terms of the Atman, no distinction between men and women. There's no sex in the Atman. There's only one, impersonal, beyond everything. But from this other point of view, we have the Brahman aspect, which is always considered to be inactive. And there's a Shiva lying flat, inert on the ground. And the Divine Mother will be standing on them. And they have to go together. This combination of Purusha and Prakriti is, of course, very, very important in the Sankhya system. For them, you can't explain reality without both of them together. And they're intimately connected but independent. Intimately connected but independent. And they give this example, Andhu Pangu Nyaya, the blind person and the lame person. That Prakriti is blind because it's just power and force. There's not that chit, there's not that intellect behind it. That'll be like a blind person who is very active, strong, can walk and everything. And Purusha is like a lame person who can see. So both of them have to go someplace. One of them can walk but can't see the direction. The other knows exactly where to go but can't walk. So the lame person gets on the shoulders of the blind person and directs the blind person where to go when they both reach the goal together. Anyhow, this is one of these nyayas. These are all these different illustrations that are used to explain. So this male, female, Ardhanarishwara. We have these images that literally you'll see half of it is a female figure and half of it is a male figure. It's one way of explaining these two aspects of reality. We talk about Mother Nature and Father Time. Two different things, something like that. That the one is the time will be more there's an infinite, absolute, transcendent, and the mother aspect will be the earth, Mother Earth, and something like that. See what Thakur does. First, he's saying, look upon your wife and everything is as a demon and the world is a forest fire and everything. Then right back, but she's the divine mother. Look upon her, see the dwelling within. So he does that. He'll give these very harsh, strong things sometimes and then soften it afterwards. He's like an expert physician. He used to say, first you bring the boil to a head, then you can lance it. So he knows what he's doing. For us, it's hard to figure out a little bit. To the devotees, one cannot renounce by the mere wish. So now again, reading M's mind, he's thinking, now M is thinking, let me renounce everything then. One cannot renounce by the mere wish. There are prarabdha karma, inherited tendencies and the like. Now this prarabdha karma, we've discussed this so many times, the different aspects to it. What Thakur is talking about here is the samskaras. This prarabdha karma, it may be responsible for the family we're born into, all of that. That we can't do anything about. And may be responsible for how long we live, whether we'll lead a married life or a life of renunciation, may have to do with whether we have some terrible illness in store. We don't know. All of these possible things. He's emphasizing here this idea of samskaras, that we're born with very strong tendencies. And there may be a very strong tendency to lead a family life, to have children and everything. And there's no use trying to pretend that we don't have that tendency. And just because we'd love to lead a life of renunciation, that we decide to do it, despite the fact that the mind is filled with strong worldly tendencies. So this is what he's saying. It's not just we have a desire. See, anybody who sees Sri Ramakrishna there, it'll flash in their mind, yes, he's achieved that by renouncing everything. Shouldn't we do it? That doubt may come into the mind. But he's saying it's not such a simple thing. That this, again, adhikara, that one has to be qualified to do these things. Once a yogi said to a king, live with me in the forest and think of God. The king replied, that I cannot very well do. I could live with you, but I still have the desire for enjoyment. If I live in the forest, perhaps I shall create a kingdom even here. I still have desires. Now, nigraha kim karishyati. This is a very big issue in Gita, that to what extent can we control these things? And when in the context of Gita, is really this question with Arjuna, that he's a kshatriya, and this is his swabhava. And this is something that's very hard for him to ever change. That he says, your swabhava, this will make you, your nature will make you fight in this battle. That there's nothing you can do about it. If we think that this nigraha kim karishyati, what will restraint do? If we think that applies to every samskara we have and every little desire, then we'll never strive for anything and we'll never do anything. So if because of our old karma, prarabdha karma, that we have some tendency for enjoyment, then we have to see it through a little bit, but it doesn't mean that the whole life we have to, that'll define us. Spiritual life means some type of struggle. If we say that, well, this is natural. Swamiji used to say spiritual life means fighting nature. Fighting nature. That means our nature. It doesn't mean the external nature. That everybody has worldly tendencies. I don't care how qualified they are to lead a monastic life. No one is born without some worldly tendencies and desire for enjoyment. It's impossible. We're part of this animal kingdom. Impossible to become, unless one is a Shukadeva or something. It'll be such a rare thing. So we have to know what things are really so inherently part of our constitution that we're better off not trying to change them, and what things we simply fight and try to change. So Swamiji's his theory was take the path of least resistance. If it's the householder life, then that's the best life. If it's a monastic life, that's the best life. But if the samskaras are very strong, then the householder life is meant for that. It's meant for allowing enjoyment so that we see through it. We reach the end of our enjoyment, bhoganta. We reach the end of it, and then the life of sannyasa will come later, at the end of life, or next life. And don't think that all of us who renounce it have such wonderful samskaras. We just like to struggle a little more than other people, maybe, or circumstances, or grace, whatever. Natabhar Pandya used to look after his cows in this garden. I don't think we know anything about him, huh? Just somebody. During his boyhood, he had many desires. Hence, he established a castor oil factory and earned a great deal of money. He has a prosperous castor oil business at Alambazar. There is one sect that prescribes spiritual discipline in company with women. I was once taken to the women belonging to the Karta Bhaja sect. There were at that time a number of different groups. This Goshpara, the Sahajiyas, different Baal groups that some of them were Vaishnava, and their ideal was as Radha Krishna, that type of thing. Others were Shaktas also, and there were different, even Muslims. A lot of these Baals, they made no distinction between Hindu and Muslim. They could belong to any community, no caste distinction. They were always interesting people. But this Karta Bhaja sect, for some reason, this Vaishnav Charan, he was the spiritual leader, you can say, of this whole group of devotees. And Thakur didn't have, he didn't criticize them so much, but he warned people against them. He said that they can also realize God, but it's not a clean path, the dirty path. It's like entering through the back door of the house where the latrine is, where the scavenger goes to clean out the toilets and everything. It still gets you in the house. It's possible. But he said it's a very dangerous thing. But Thakur was so innocent. He would go with his Vaishnav Charan to these groups, and he would watch them. They would start drinking. He would think, oh, now they'll do their japa. But instead, they start singing and dancing and everything. And the women and the men are trying to hook up and everything. It was very innocent. At one point, it got too much, and he said, I'm not going to go back again. But he's talking about this. I was once taken to the women belonging to the Karta Bhaja sect. They all sat around me. I addressed them as mother. At that, they whispered among themselves, he is still a Paravartaka, a beginner in the spiritual path. See, seeing Thakur, thinking he's a beginner. He doesn't know the way. According to that sect, the Paravartaka is the beginner. Then comes the Sadhaka, the struggling aspirant. And last of all, the Siddha of the Siddha. Usually he mentions four. The Siddha will be the first, and then the Siddha of the Siddha. Anyhow, the supremely perfect. A woman walked over to Vaishnav Charan and sat near him. I asked him about it. He answered, she feels just like a young girl. One quickly strays from the religious path by looking on woman as wife. This means somebody who's not his wife. This because they would Of course, it could be husband and wife, but generally these were just devotees. But to regard her as mother is a pure attitude. Now, look at all the different things he said to M. Now, he's addressing this devotee who asked the question, but we get the sense that this is mostly for M. So he's praising this life of intense renunciation, at the same time saying, see God in everyone, and then saying that it's a question of samskara. It's not just a question of this great desire to renounce everything. You have to be prepared for it. Telling him all of these things. Now, M is going to have weeks here to let all of this kind of run riot in his mind, and trying to figure out really what to do with his life. We have to remember he was ready to commit suicide when he met Sri Ramakrishna. That he was in such a state and so unhappy at home with his family life and everything. So this isn't that much later. This is still 1883. It's a year and a half after that. Some of the devotees took leave of the master, saying that they were going to visit the temple of Kali and several of the other temples. M went walking alone in the Panchavati and other places in the temple garden. He thought about the master's assurance that God can be easily realized, and about his exhortation to lead a life of intense renunciation, and is saying that Maya, when recognized, takes to flight. At 3:30 in the afternoon, M again entered the master's room and sat on the floor. A teacher from the Broughton Institution had come with several students to pay a visit to Sri Ramakrishna. They were conversing together. Now and then the teacher asked questions. The conversation was about the worship of images. Master to the teacher: what is wrong with the image worship? The Vedanta says that Brahman manifests itself where there is existence, light, and love. Asti bhati priya. Therefore, nothing exists but Brahman. How long do small girls play with their dolls? As long as they are not married and do not live with their husbands. After marriage, they put the dolls away in a box. What further need is there of worshiping the image after the vision of God? So Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji also, they recognize that this is an early step. Kindergarten, sometimes they say, of religion, but necessary for some people. We were reading Swami Buddhashanandaji. You'll forgive me for quoting him all of the time, but that's what I'm reading. And he's so insightful. He says if we look at spiritual life as climbing a ladder, and there are different rungs of the ladder, if the first rung is image worship, taking the help of some symbol, if that's the first rung, and we're not ready for anything higher, and we refuse to take that step, we'll never climb the ladder. We'll never climb the ladder. So we take advantage of things, and there'll be many people, we've seen some of the great sadhus of our order. It's not that they reach a state in spiritual life where they don't show any respect for images. They'll still go on pilgrimage, go to temples, everything, do with great devotion, do pranam in the temple. It's not that, but they don't need it. It's they can sit in meditation and also feel the divine within. They don't have to do that, but it becomes a joyful thing. We get attached a little bit to these divine images, and it's helpful. It's helpful. I don't think any of us feel that we're bowing down before clay and photographs and things like that. Is what they stand for. You remember the very nice incident in the life of Swamiji when he was talking to one of the Maharajas somewhere, in Gujarat maybe, huh? And the Dewan was there and everything, and they were talking about image worship, and why do people just worship this image? It's not God. Image is not God. Rajasthan. Okay. What is it? Mangal Singh. Mangal Singh was the name of the Maharaj. So his assistant was there, huh? The Dewan or something, and he said, "Okay, you give me the picture of the Maharaja, the photograph on the wall, and you put it down and spit on it." that what he said? Or step on it, spit on it. He said, how can I spit on it? It's the picture of the Maharaja. He said, but it's not him. It's just the picture. And then he explained, see, because you have reverence for the person, you have reverence for the picture also. Because we have reverence for God, we have reverence for the image that represents it. See, these all of the educated people, it wasn't just the Brahmos, but it's all of them. Because of the influence of the British, they all had this big doubt about image worship. Is it really idolatry? They were told right and left by the missionaries that this is idolatry, that only heathens worship these images and everything. So there's doubt. There was a very strong doubt in the minds of so many people. How long do small girls play with their dolls? As long as they are not married and do not live with their husbands. After marriage, they put the dolls away in a box. What further need is there of worshiping the image after the vision of God? Did Thakur stop going to the Kali temple? He still went, but there was no need. He didn't have to do it. He had the highest realization. The master glanced at M and said, one attains God when one feels yearning for him. An intense restlessness is needed. Through it, the whole mind goes to God. Okay, let's stop here. So anyhow, we can just imagine what M is going through, this turmoil in his mind. It's a very important chapter, I think, that because Sri Ramakrishna, he knows that M has planned this. He knows that M is going to spend several days there and in solitude and meditation. And so he's not just lightly, without thinking about it, telling him all of these things. These are for him, I feel, especially all of these teachings, and for him to understand the need for renunciation, and at the same time to know that he, after this, that he can go back to his family and lead a life of non-attachment and perform his duty. And so this is really one of the most important periods where Sri Ramakrishna is training him, not training him for any special thing, but just so that he can, his mind will have a little bit of contentment, and he'll be able to pursue his spiritual life and everything. Anyhow, this is my imagination. The Thakur is thinking all of these things. Okay, let's close here. Om Niranjanam Nityamanandurupam Bhaktanukam Bhatadu Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shitasanamam. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who was stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.